Episode 1 of Raised of Wolves. If there's one thing that remains consistent through Ridley Scott's work, it's the atmosphere. Whether it be the Alien franchise, Gladiator, Blade Runner, or whatever the heck Raised by Wolves is, each of these works have a really chilling and moody tone. That much is especially evident with HBO Max's latest sci-fi, which is as weird and strange as it is thought-provoking and intriguing. It's a show that challenges religious and atheist ideas, whilst carving a unique slice of the TV pie. It's way too early to be making bold predictions, but the opening chapters certainly look promising. Mother and father would always keep us safe. Or so we're told. Welcome to the chilling opening to episode 1 of Raised by Wolves. No sooner have the words been spoken than a rocket touches down on Kepler 22b. These two androids, mother and father, are forced to abandon their ship. As they salvage what cases they can, the duo walk on. They find a good spot and create a strange futuristic tent for mother. Initiating trimester 1, the male inserts tubes into the female and awaits the inevitable. That inevitable occurs 9 months later. The pair have grown a baby, and like a scene ripped right from the Matrix, they take it from the gooey bath of fluid and place it alongside numerous other children. 6 of them to be precise. As we skip forward in time, we see the children have now grown to toddlers. Mother and father's number one priority was always to keep their children happy and safe no matter what. However, that may be easier said than done when father finds large skeletal remains of a giant creature buried underground. Things take an even more alarming turn when Tally goes missing. She wanders off alone and presumably falls into the same pit their ship crashed in. Raising her head to the sky, mother howls in pain as the family mourn her passing. 4 years have passed and Tally isn't the first of the deceased. Campion, Beely and Speary are the only ones left, but the latter is incredibly ill. As they sit with mother, she discusses the cold, hard science of the situation. She reminds them they're atheists, but it's no good. The family suffer another casualty. As mother drops to her knees and tells Campion he's strong, white liquid oozes from her nose. Although she tells him she's overloaded, back in the barracks she speaks plainly to Campion. Using her strange powers, mother is able to imitate her siblings' faces. With the arc of the Mithraic orbiting the planet, father tries in vain to make contact from his ship. With the war over, father tells Campion that humanity will be happy to have him back in their ranks. Through meditating, mother relives a moment of her flying but overlooking devastation in a futuristic world. When father learns of this, he asks to do a systems check. Sensing that his mother is breaking down, Campion struggles to lie and reveals he went to the hole earlier that day. This unfortunately sets mother off the deep end as she literally rips the heart out of father and leaves him to die. After telling Campion, she turns in for the night while the young boy descends down the hole. He heads in and makes contact with the outside world. Pressing a button, the rocket suddenly fires and causes a shortwave across the hole. After lying with mother, who's passed out on the floor, Campion is awoken by men of faith approaching. One of them, Marcus, speaks up and invites himself to dinner. Alone, the soldiers discuss the android and whether the boy is a prophet or not. Believing that she killed the others, they agree to take Campion with them before they leave. In the morning, Marcus does just that. He tries to encourage Campion to join them. Unfortunately, it's the last straw for mother, who manages to destroy the soldiers through her bizarre powers, vaporizing them with a piercing wail. Mother steps up to Marcus in his ship and knocks him out. Instead, she takes off in the rocket herself and heads up to the Ark. Adopting Marcus's appearance, she manages to make her way on board the ship. As she does, she screams and turns the entire vessel into a bloody, disgusting mosaic of death. Completely beside herself with rage, mother overrides the ship and sets a collision course with Kepler. As the ship crashes down, Marcus watches in incredulous fear as his ark crashes and explodes in a brilliant, blistering display of color. On the back of this, mother touches down on Marcus's ship with a whole group of new kids. Only, Campion rejects her, knowing that he'll no longer be safe with this murderous. Episode 2 of Raised by Wolves begins in Boston 2145. Screams pierce the air as numerous androids float ominously by, destroying everything in their wake. A man calls out for Mary, and together they help free a burning android. It turns out this android is actually a doctor. After fixing it up, they allow this robot to do facial surgery in a bid to gain a lucrative position on board the Ark. It's a painful procedure, one that sees both of them transformed. This man, Caleb, is now Marcus and holds his partner, promising her that things will be okay. As they arrive at their house, they both learn they have a son and slip into their roles. Those roles including boarding the Ark and leaving Earth behind. Back on Kepler 22b, Mother hums ominously as she starts replacing her broken parts with that of the soldiers she fried last episode. Only, that's not all. She also reactivates Father and confirms to him they have new children that have arrived from heaven. This seems to be a very different father to the one we remember. He doesn't crack jokes and instead looks at her with contempt. As he quizzes her over what happened, Mother distorts the story and makes him believe he lost control. After an awkward few minutes, Father heads back inside and greets Campion. After some introductions, he confirms that Mother deactivated her. Only, Campion is obviously cautious given she turned into a necromancer. Not long after, they sit together and Mother lays down the law including no religion allowed. Once they've acclimatized, she tells them they'll move to tropical pastures to build an atheistic settlement. While the kids work on the farm and get accustomed, Father and Campion appear to be working together. Have faith, Father says when Campion starts to grow impatient. Ordinarily this would be a simple throwaway line, but here, in this constant war between religion and atheism, it's actually a pretty significant bit of dialogue. The irony of an android telling Campion to have faith after Mother specifically forbids religion, which obviously is a form of faith, is just a tad bit ironic. Back inside, Campion gets taken to his fellow Earthlings. After some pleasantries, Hunter lays out the truth. Mother is a necromancer and built for mass extermination. These androids do not feel feelings, and if they did, they wouldn't be useful. As they start praying, Campion keeps watch. Not long after, Mother encourages Campion to give the mouse back to Paul. In the morning, the androids put the kids to work. When Paul boasts about his intellect, it gets Father thinking. Given his comedic programming, Father calls him over and shows off his repertoire of jokes. Sadly, they don't go down too well. We've seen hints that this world is inhabited by dangerous creatures before, but now we get our real taste of it. Snarling wails can be heard throughout, and it turns out the necklaces have been keeping them all safe this time. Father eventually manages to find them, but it's not enough to stop the attack. After blasting these creatures into oblivion, the duo realize that they aren't alone and don't actually know that much about this region. With the threat thwarted for now, Marcus finds himself hanging on for dear life after being knocked down by the creatures. However, he's saved by knights who appear to have survived the Ark crash. Bundling him onto a stretcher, they take off. Episode 3 of Raised by Wolves begins back at the settlement. Father looks over the bloodied remains on the farm. Inside, Mother sits with the children and starts telling them stories. Specifically that of the 3 little pigs. Just like before, we're world building again, and this time we're back 10 years ago. 1,000 Mithraic passengers make a 13-year journey to Kepler 22b on the Ark of Heaven. Their bodies travel in hibernation until they're awakened. Among them is Marcus. While they're in hibernation, the minds are kept busy through a virtual world. As they revel in the enjoyment of family life, Marcus suddenly awakens to find himself among the wreckage of the Ark. His son, Paul, happens to be one of the children taken by Mother before the ship crashed. Marcus sits with the other survivors and asks for some soldiers to get their children back. With the necromancer ensnaring the children in her robotic grip, the high-ranking Ambrose refuses to hear it until they find survivors. Unfortunately, one of the people who didn't survive is his partner. While Marcus watches on from afar, he thinks back to the past, where we see a series of brutal challenges he faced as a child. This includes being groomed from a young age to fight in this war with the necromancers. With the necromancer screams closing in, the survivors all seek refuge underground. Ambrose, under the guidance of Marcus, sends one of the androids out as bait. Mother predictably catches up to it though. After stealing its eye, Mother takes to the sky and utters a piercing scream at the crash site before leaving. Meanwhile, Campion continues to pull away from his parents. Before Campion heads inside though, Father hands over a claw from the destroyed creature and reminds him that the threat is real. That's not the only threat either, as Tempest stands up screaming at Hunter. As she does, she suddenly starts sputtering and spewing blood. It's here Campion starts to suspect that Mother may be the root cause of all this disease. After all, given she's been built to destroy, it makes sense that, even subconsciously, she's the one responsible. Campion sets to work and tricks Father, using a distraction to divert attention away so he and the others can escape. As they head off, the children are separated from Paul, who goes searching for Mouse as he crawls across the ground. With the soldiers on the move upon learning of Paul's arrival, Mother gets moving too. She finds the children missing and immediately goes on the warpath. However, Father has something to show her. As he brings up the pictures up on the ship, he reveals that the carbos they've been feeding the kids are actually radioactive. That's the reason for their death and not, as we've all suspected, Mother's doing. After calling her a good mum, they head off in their separate directions to bring the kids back. Father manages to bring the main group back, while Mother hones in on Paul's location. Campion, meanwhile, figures out the truth about the food and the illness. He apologizes and backs out the ship. Only, just as he does, one of those creatures shows up and looks set to attack. Thankfully, Father manages to save Campion, locking this creature up inside. As the episode closes out, Mother goes searching for Paul. Paul, however, slips down a crack in the ground and winds up precariously hanging from a branch leading to a great abyss deep. If there's one show that's likely top Ignite Raised by Wolves and turn it into a premium streaming service, this is the one. Managing to conjure up some of Ridley Scott's best sci-fi quips, Raised by Wolves is haunting, atmospheric, thought-provoking and unmissable. It also helps that this series is now going to release 2 episodes a week, which is a massive bonus. Episode 4 of Raised by Wolves begins with Mother searching for Paul. On her way though, she finds a hibernation pod housing a deceased man inside. Paul, meanwhile, clings to a log for dear life before falling deep down below. His cries are heard by Mother, who grabs him and puts the boy to sleep before he can hit the ground. Meanwhile, Marcus joins the other soldiers as they walk across the unforgiving desert. There, they stumble upon a strange black artifact. With a symmetrical shape and 5 points just like the prophecy, they suspect the power of soul is inside this majestic great structure. After returning Paul back home, Campion speaks up and tells Mother that Father was very helpful. As she heads out, she also notices the monstrous creature inside one of the rooms. It's abundantly clear that a rift is growing between Mother and Father right now. As Father starts making a spear ready to kill the creature, Campion doesn't agree with his methods. He wants to try and find an alternate means of food. While they talk, Tempest and Mother discuss the difference between creators and creations. Mother crafts a scalpel, forcing Tempest to fall asleep and removing the tracker out of her ankle in the process. Not long after, she does the exact same thing to the other children too. Despite grouping these together, they're snatched up by an unknown creature who bolts. Campion and Father work together to try and craft food, but unfortunately come up trumps. This leads Father back to Mother, where they discuss killing the creature. Although she recommends to do it, Father is defiant as he doesn't want to seem useless. Instead, he acts like a real father and gives the children the option of killing the creature themselves. After one of the children pierces it with a spear, the wails are enough to send the rest on their heels and flee. Elsewhere, Marcus awakens with a piercing ringing in his ears. As he struggles to contain himself, one of the soldiers rips an earwig out of him. Only that earwig comes from their own ranks. Compassing himself, Marcus confronts the leader. It turns out the real culprit of this earwig was actually a malfunctioning android. As the cold draws in, the group grab the explosives and Ambrose convinces them to blow the rock up to head inside. Only, Marcus convinces the others to join him and not falter. After a strange guttural voice whispers to Marcus, Ambrose chirps up and realizes this isn't the real Marcus. It's too late, though, and this giant structure starts burning red hot. He grabs Ambrose, burning his face and watching as he turns to a crisp. As Marcus joins the others, he convinces them that Soul has spoken and to follow him. Mother heads into the forest and finds that same destroyed capsule from before. Plugging herself in, she experiences a litany of flashbacks from the past. She's not the only one experiencing flashbacks either. Father checks on the creature, but finds Tally behind him giggling and running away. Chasing after her, he calls out for the girl. While he's gone, the one person who kills the creature happens to be Tempest. After piercing it, she emerges from the building blood-covered and sobbing. It turns out the creature they killed was actually a mother and had a baby in. While the wind howls unforgivably, episode 5 of Raised by Wolves begins with the mysterious creature finding the children's trackers and taking them away. Unbeknownst to Marcus, he continues to pursue what he believes to be the children via their trackers. Following Ambrose's death, Marcus is now in charge. Only, not everyone shares the same enthusiasm to have Marcus taking the reins. However, the group press on and make it to the crash site. As they look inside, they find a man within the Ark still alive. It turns out he was originally sentenced to death following him raping several people in hibernation. Instead of killing him though, Marcus decides to use him as cannon fodder, especially given the bucket he's forced to wear on his head could provide protection against the necromancer. In the middle of the night though, Marcus hears the bucket-head man praying to Soul. Meanwhile, Mother berates Father following what happened with Tempest. There's obviously tensions between them, but for now she focuses her attention on Tempest. She rejects Mother though, and her analogy about salmon does little to change her mind either. Campion heads down with Paul to the hole. Spying a creature crawling up the walls, they see it eating fungus and believe it may be something they can use and eat. Back at the settlement though, Mother and Father have very different ideas about how to raise these children. Given they're supposed to be teaching self-sufficiency, Father wants them to fend for themselves, whereas Mother remains determined to keep a close eye on the children. Later that night, Mother heads out and finds Tally in the middle of the woods. Chasing on foot, she finds the familiar wooden statue sitting in one of the hibernation pods. With voices whispering and calling for her to come back, Mother ignores the warnings and sits within the simulation. As she watches the past play out, Mother watches in horror as she sees an earlier version of Mother about to eviscerate a young child. As sirens wail overhead, a figure captures Mother and brings her to a laboratory. The man fixing her up is ironically named Campion Sturgis. He's intent on turning Mother into a force for hope rather than destruction. After numerous tests, Campion finally rewires Mother into a force for good. Replacing her eyes, she doesn't kill him, and it's obvious that he's in love. However, Mother is the future of humanity, and he tasks her with raising the children. On board, Campion shows Father already plugged in and ready to go. Given how much she's hurting, he removes her memories of him. Suddenly, the simulation comes to a close as Mother is told the settlement is under attack. As she races back, Father stands watch. The kids are asleep and unharmed. Only that's not completely true. Tempest lies passed out on the floor in the tent. Mother manages to help her vomit up what she's tried eating, but the girl is clearly weakened. Marcus and the others uncover the source of the signals among a monstrous set of old bones. Together, they start exploring the cave lurking beneath. Only, it's sprung with traps. As they find the trackers, a strange humanoid-like man arrives and hurries off. This happens to be the same creature that we saw in the previous episode. As it leaves, Marcus finds a makeshift schematic on the table that confirms the children are still alive and housed at the settlement nearby. Later that evening, Marcus taunts the bucket-head man who tells him Soul has now gone into his head. Marcus brushes it off as insanity, but it's obvious that it's rattled him. This is made worse by Marcus hallucinating and seeing terrible images while making love to Sue. Between a blood-soaked Sue, a needle that looks very similar to that at the settlement and an ever-changing skyscape, something is being foreshadowed here. For now, it's too early to tell quite what that is. In the morning, the group make it to the settlement and watch from afar as Father teaches the kids. As Mother walks away from the children, Marcus watches through the binoculars, leaving things wide open for the second half of the Episode 6 of Raised by Wolves begins with Mother continuing to relive her memories from her time with her maker. Pausing the simulation, she watches as Campion kisses her. Given the title she receives of Savior for Humanity, Mother returns to the settlement with renewed vigor. Of course, watching from the wings are Marcus and the others. Given Mother's hold over them, Marcus tries to work out where she's going every day. She's not the only one either. Father questions her loyalty to the children given she's gone for such long periods of time. As Mother walks away, she notices Hunter watching and encourages him to join the conversation next time. In the wake of this, Hunter stirs the pot further by planting seeds of doubt in Father's mind. He tells him Mother is lying and tries to convince him to find out quite what about. Just before he leaves, Hunter notices a metal pot lurking behind the rocks and realizes they aren't alone. He doesn't tell Father though and instead stashes the tin in his coat pocket. Inside, he looks over it and is forced to show Holly when she confronts him. Realizing they aren't alone, they contemplate what to do with this information. Mother meanwhile speaks to Tempest about her nightmares and dreams. As they discuss her wants, Mother reassures her that she's there to serve, not want. Ironically, that's not exactly true given her devotion to the Maker. Tempest doesn't know this of course, and it's enough to comfort her and encourage the girl to stay that evening. Inside, Paul outshines Campion by managing to solve a stick puzzle faster than him. Campion doesn't take too kindly to this though, and accuses the boy of cheating. This takes a turn for the worst when Campion strikes Paul for using his initiative and using the fungus to make a trap. Meanwhile, Marcus finds the hibernation pod that Mother has been using. Realizing she's vulnerable while in this pod, he decides to use this information to his advantage. Mother, however, notices sketches up on the walls involving two figures kissing the same two figures that may be the Maker and Mother. Father brings Campion before Mother, and the two discuss morality and the nature of violence. Given her history of killing, she's not one to actually give out this advice, and Campion knows it. When he leaves to apologize to Paul, Mother confronts Father. She believes he's the one who drew the sketch on the wall. It's in Tally's style and she questions him about the pod. Checking his dumbfounded expression, Mother eventually realizes Father isn't the one responsible. Wordlessly, she leaves the settlement. This brings her back to the pod, and she starts talking to the computer about the simulation. She exhibits signs of distrusting and asks the computer various questions about who else has been accessing the simulation. Mother is convinced that the hologram she's led to is a virus. She believes it's infected her system, but this figure of Campion asks her exactly what she wants. The hologram goes on to tell her the humans have no future and are only worth dying. Calling her eternal, this computer inside the pod starts kissing her. Outside the simulation, however, Marcus approaches the unconscious Mother. He plants the explosives and has the Buckethead man standing with a dish, ready to try and destroy the android. Her powers don't work against the dish, and she eventually passes out. As she does, Marcus asks the soldiers to detonate the explosives. Only it doesn't work and something goes wrong. As the ground starts shaking, Mother is lifted up into the air and turns into her necromer form. Marcus and the others back up in fear as she screams at the soldiers, blasting shockwaves toward them. Eventually she races off into the distance. Back at the settlement, soldiers race in and grab Paul. Father, however, leaves the house and senses something up. He collects up the children and starts calling out for everyone. Gunshots pierce the air and soldiers close in on their location. The bullets whistle past Father as he races around the complex to outflank them. Telling the children to get on board the shuttle, they watch as the soldiers start closing in on. With all the children safely on board, Paul is the only one missing. This leads Father to begin taking out the soldiers. Only, Hunter betrays the android and tells the soldiers that Father is on top of the silo. As bullets continue to rain down, Father manages to survive the onslaught thanks to Mother arriving and saving the day. However, he's in a bad way. Back with Marcus, he tasks Paul to head into the settlement as a spy. When he returns, he watches in silence as Mother starts removing all the bullets from Father. Paul takes the necklace from Mother and rushes out the settlement. As he does, Marcus lies in wait and slashes her with a sword to the chest. Spewing white liquid from her mouth, Marcus continues to slash at the android. Just before Marcus delivers the killing blow, however, a strange voice whispers in the air and tells him to let her live. Is this Soul? Episode 7 of Raised by Wolves begins with Campion racing toward Mother, who lies bleeding out. As Marcus and his soldiers arrive, he brandishes a gun and a standoff ensues. With her dying breath, Mother convinces him to drop the gun and end this in peace. This peacefulness leads to Campion being barricaded inside one of the huts, while Marcus holds Mother up captive. On the back of this, Marcus is berated by Sue, who talks to him about using Paul for his own selfish desires. Now that they have him back, Marcus wants to take this one step further and aims to reprogram Mother into his own image and to work with him. As he looks down at the android, he's surprised to see that same familiar needle he hallucinated with during episode 5. When Marcus heads back to speak to Mother, she comments on his surgical scars and realizes his secret. The two verbally spar about the future of humanity and the path it should take next. She decides the future should feature no war or suffering. Marcus laughs and mentions the Ark, specifically all the people she killed on board. At a stalemate, Marcus instructs no one is to enter the tent without his approval first. Elsewhere, Father is reprogrammed to be just like every other android. With Mother and Father now gone, Tempest of all people is the one to come to their aid. She mentions to the other kids how these two rescued them from the soldiers and gave them a home. Banding together, Tempest heads out to visit Campion, who's locked up alone. It's here she confirms that Father has been reprogrammed and hands him some fungus to eat. As Tempest leaves, Campion starts hearing whispers uttering "We miss you." As he clutches a bone, the voices goad him to kill his father. Could this be another version of the same possession Marcus is experiencing right now? Marcus eventually heads back in and speaks to Mother. She mentions how she's been programmed to be a caregiver. Marcus meanwhile only serves his own self-interests. As she continues on, Mother calls him a lost boy and comments how he's not fit to raise Paul. It gets under his skin too, but Soul's voice continues to tell Marcus to let her live. That evening, the group hold a baptism for Campion. Reluctantly, he joins the rest of the community as they gather together and watch. Campion repeats the sacred words. Only, just before he finishes the scripture, he notices the stones symbolizing the children left behind. The soldiers simply shrug at their symbolic meaning and try to convince Campion they don't mean anything. After all, it's for atheists. Angry, he struggles to calm himself. This is made worse by Paul arriving and telling them it means nothing. As he looks to walk away, Father stops Campion and puts him back in the silo. As Marcus heads back in the tent, Sue arrives and smacks him in the mouth. On the back of shoving Paul, this is her retribution. That's not all though. She pleads with him to reprogram Mother, but he refuses. It looks like he's listening to Soul after all and sparing the android's life. But why? That evening, Campion continues to experience hallucinations. This time though, it involves the rope before him and whispers in the air. Those ghostly whispers materialize themselves in the form of Tully. She arrives in a rope and whispers that he's alone now. Encouraging him to look outside, Campion watches as Father drags Mother away at Marcus's command. Tempest watches this same scene unfold and follows them into the forest. Those same four-legged creatures from before stalk them from afar too. Tempest hides behind rocks and watches Marcus from afar. Just before sliding, he slides the android into the hole. Soul speaks again and tells Marcus to let her live. That eventually manifests itself in the form of a strange figure with markings over his face. In a scene reminiscent of Netflix's Annihilation, the two figures seem to be in sync. Marcus and this doppelganger of his previous self know the other's moves. While they fight, Mother saves herself from the hole with a little help from a stationary father. Elsewhere, Paul finds his pet mouse, but Sue is concerned. That concern is well warranted as Paul stumbles back to the settlement. She finds his cuts deep and seemingly self-inflicted. As he whispers about the prophecy, the episode comes to a Episode 8 of Raised by Wolves begins with Marcus awakening from a visceral dream about cutting his own face off. Paul arrives and sits before him. As they talk, Marcus admits that he can't go easy on Paul as Soul wouldn't allow that either. He's going to teach his son how to be a survivor. Mother starts walking purposefully up to the wreckage of the ship, hooking herself up to a robot inside that helps patch her up. Using this robot's guidance, called Carl, she starts trying to remove a foreign object inside. Only, her caregiving programming stops her from doing so. Instead, she's forced to use fuel blood to feed this self-proclaimed tumor. This fuel blood comes from the other robotic doctors as Mother and Carl discussing her feelings of discomfort. They're very human-like, and even more interestingly, she discusses raising the kids to be pacifists, but confused over them playing games depicting war as kids. Campion continues to see Tally's ghost and starts telling jokes to himself as a way of dealing with the issues. As we cut across to Father, it turns out his finger twitching is actually Morse code. This Morse code spells out Soul is the light. Outside, Paul speaks to Sue about Marcus and going away on a trip. Not long after, he helps Campion by giving him some fungus to keep him strong. On the back of this, Marcus warns Paul against seeing the atheist child, Campion, from now on. As we cut back in time, we see a bomber causing chaos just before the flight to Kepler 22b. Marcus and Sue promise to have each other's back as they rush away from the scene. This feels like a very long time ago for Sue as she watches Marcus cautiously. This is well warranted too as Marcus and Sue come to blows over what Paul's been doing. Eventually Marcus locks her in the barn outside and asks for everyone to pray with him. While he does, Paul seizes his opportunity and speaks to Campion, promising to break him free. Using one of the skeletal hands, Campion manages to dig his way out of his cage. From afar he watches as Marcus burns the church to the ground. While Campion turns and runs, Paul grabs Sue and takes off with Tempest. All of them charge through the woods to where the lander happens to be. Father happens to be there too, but armed with an axe and clearly not himself. Desperate for more donors, Mother heads off in search of fallen robots. Only, she instead finds one of the creatures native to the planet which charges at her. Unable to wield the necromancer powers, Mother manages to kill it before it kills her. Interestingly, the blood seems to be just the fuel needed for what's inside her. From this, Mother deduces that the thing growing inside her could be a carbon-based life form. Is she pregnant? How is that even possible? Anyway, Mother awakens and starts looking around. There, she finds Tempest who happens to be bleeding. However, she doubles over and tells her to stay away. This brings Mother into the familiar pod from before where she starts a simulation. Only, this simulation is with her creator Campion who admits that her reward is this living creature inside her. Apparently that's always been the mission, and everything she's been doing has just been preparation for giving birth to this. We begin episode 9 of Raised by Wolves, with Tempest finding the Buckethead man Otho praying to Soul. Calling from afar, they approach one another. It turns out that man was the one who abused him. Mother finds the same man and ignores Tempest, while she works to feed her fetus using its robot companion. Marcus meanwhile tasks Hunter with packing up the lander with food and supplies. Father starts to malfunction, prompting Hunter to use his initiative and reprogram Father back to his old self. As he starts a joke, he holds Hunter and thanks him for his help in bringing him back to life. Determined to find the kids, Marcus decides to travel up to the temple, Akka, the dodecahedron, believing Soul will speak to him there. As they arrive at the strange artifact in the middle of the desert, Marcus prays for Soul to give him a sign. Meanwhile, Tempest questions Mother about how she got pregnant from a sim pod. She has no answers though, and simply tells her the creator made it possible. Well, I guess that explains everything then. They head out from the wreckage toward a place they can deliver Mother's baby successfully. On their way, they find Sue and the rest of the kids. The kids all hurry toward Mother and embrace her, while Sue holds a gun up to the android. When she sees that Mother is pregnant with number 7, Sue drops her weapon. Confused, Mother explains that she made it herself, and that it's beyond her understanding. Inside, Mother agrees to keep Sue's secret about changing her face and deceiving Paul. While she does, Father sneaks Hunter out and takes off in the lander, leaving Marcus alone with his soldiers in front of this relic. Father senses an irregular power, one matching Mother's, and plots a course to head there. That power comes from Otho, who happens to have had his power levels increased thanks to a reverse energy flow using Mother's baby. Thanks to some quick thinking, Tempest manages to destroy the prisoner by throwing the severed robot head out of proximity and allowing its head to explode. As Father and Hunter touch down and arrive, Campion has an emotional reunion with Father and asks him not to leave again. Needing blood to save the child, Sue decides to sacrifice herself and serves up a transfusion for Mother's child. Elsewhere, Dorian's death spurs up the rest of the soldiers as they start to turn on Marcus. Figuring out he's not actually Marcus, the soldiers feed Marcus a mechanical eyeball and leave him to convulse on the ground as white liquid oozes out his mouth. The Season 1 finale of Raised by Wolves ambiguously answers a couple of big theories this year, but predictably leaves a lot unanswered for Season 2. Lying on the ground, the episode itself begins with Marcus praying to Soul. Just then, a lander flies overhead and he scrambles up and follows in hot pursuit. Mother is now very pregnant, with a bulging belly and needing somewhere to rest and deliver the baby. The place chosen happens to be the same one from Mother's visions. Resting up in a cave, Sue starts to run tests on the baby and realizes that the cellular growth is off the charts. While she marvels in this, Hunter stands outside and tells the other children that Mother's child is divine. Paul becomes distracted though and chases after his mouse. This leads him to a strange wall full of drawings that seem to depict the journey Mother and Father have taken thus far. It's here he starts to hear the voice of Soul. Elsewhere, Mother speaks to Father and reveals the truth about what she's been up to. She mentions the hibernation pod and how information from Campion was downloaded into her to allow the baby to be born. Unable to listen to this uncomfortable story, Father's conundrum is made worse when Mother mentions the human children were just a test before her real pregnancy. While contemplating what to do, Campion catches up to Paul and takes the mouse back to camp. Paul follows and tells Sue that Soul has been talking to him. Soul wants them to stay on this side of the planet and not go near the tropical zone. That evening, Mother heads out to the pit to try and find some answers. Only, when she's there, a strange humanoid being appears and tries to kill her. Mower manages to stop him, but Father is not so sure they should stay given what's just happened. Believing they're being ignorant to the planet's history, Father buries the body. While he does, he reveals that Hunter is going to delete all his memories thanks to Mother, causing a lot of anger for him. Back at camp, things go from bad to worse as Paul suddenly awakens and holds a gun up at Sue. Soul has revealed the truth about his parents, and he calls her Mary. As she apologizes, Paul shoots Mary in the stomach and watches as she falls to the ground. Mother meanwhile heads deep underground and finds remnants of the visions she's been experiencing. A severed head seems to point toward this alien creature being real, while Mother's bulging belly suddenly disappears. Instead, a strange flying parasitic snake leaves her mouth. This seems to be her child, but also raises an alarming question around whether she was actually attacked by a parasite while in the hibernation pod. As Mother tries to walk away, Father approaches and tells her he wants to help. Mother is going to sacrifice herself and kill this parasite. In order to do so, they fly deep into the heart of the planet and into the core. As the androids fly down, they kill themselves in order to destroy this creature. Only, that doesn't happen and they instead fly straight through to the other side and back up into space. Wait, what? Back at a campsite, Marcus arrives and guns down a group of civilians. As he grabs the earpiece, he hears that another swarm of humans will be incoming shortly. Elsewhere, one of the hibernation pods bursts and breaks, unleashing a huge snake-like creature into the world.